NATO is expanding and Ukraine's partners are becoming more determined. Hello, this is Diana Kolesnik speaking from Kyiv, Ukraine, UATV English studio in a weekly attempt to bring the hardest truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Sweden officially joined the North Atlantic Alliance and became its 32nd member. This is evidenced by the corresponding protocol published on the website of the US State Department. The Swedish flag-raising ceremony at the NATO headquarters in Brussels is scheduled to take place on Monday, March the 11th.
Sverige är EU. Sweden is an outstanding country, but we are joining in NATO to even better defend all that we are and all that we believe in. We defend our freedom, our democracy and our values together with others. Sweden is leaving behind 200 years of neutrality and military non-alignment. It's a big step and something to take seriously, but it's also a very natural step that we take. Membership in NATO means that we now come home to a large number of democracies cooperation for peace and freedom, a very successful cooperation.
By the way, Sweden's accession to NATO is very useful for Ukraine, because now our country has become the first in the queue for admission. Perhaps only Bosnia and Herzegovina will be in front of us, but it is more important that Sweden is ready to provide gripping fighters to Ukraine after the Swedish application to join NATO is finally approved. This readiness was confirmed on the sidelines of the Munich conference by Swedish Defense Minister Paul Jönsson. Now, according to Jönsson, the efforts of the allies are focused on the transfer of American F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, which are ready to be provided by the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium and Norway. But as the Swedish minister said, if we can help in any way, we will also be happy to consider this possibility. Ukraine is waiting. I would like to remind you that Finland has already joined NATO. The Baltic Sea has now become a fully internal NATO sea. What can Russia do about this? But nothing, because it cannot do anything in the Black Sea, where Ukraine destroys Russian ships one by one. And in the Baltic Sea, there is a fleet of all NATO countries, and I think they will find control over Russian ships. But the most profound changes are likely to take place later in the northern region. Cooperation between the four main countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Finland, has long been close, but it is now set to become even more intense. Last year, the air forces of the four Scandinavian countries announced their intention to operate their fleet of around 230 fighter jets as a single unit, making it larger than the UK's RAF or Germany's Air Force. Norwegian F-35 and Swedish Gripen fighters are already practicing leading on Finnish roads. Sweden, which does not have a direct border with Russia, is likely to play a different role for NATO military planners than border states. According to officials, Stockholm will become a logistics center in the event of a conflict, as well as a route for reinforcements from Finland or the Baltic states. But Sweden also has special opportunities. It has extensive experience with submarines and underwater forces, which is increasingly important in the Baltic Sea, with several inexplicable cases of sabotage have occurred in recent years, from the blowing up of the Nord Stream gas pipelines to the cutting of communications between Finland and Estonia. This week, NATO countries began exercises to defend its newly expanding Nordic territory, when more than 20,000 soldiers from 13 nations take part in drills lasting nearly 2 weeks in the northern regions of Finland, Norway and Sweden. The Pan-Nordic drill is part of the Steadfast Defender 24, NATO's biggest exercises in decades, with up to 90,000 troops involved over several months of drills that are aimed at showing that the alliance can defend all of its territory up to its border with Russia.
The exercise has just started, but my impression so far is that it's going to be a really, really good exercise where we are able actually to train what we never have trained before. That is launching Swedish air operations in the framework of a NATO operation. And it's a lot of challenges that comes with that, actually. And one of them is how we conduct air C2 or air control. So what we'll do now is trying to synchronize the way that we fight the war with the NATO's air command and control. And that's a challenge, but it's a positive challenge.
Roughly half of the participating troops will drill on land. The rest will train at sea with over 50 participant submarines, frigates, corvettes, aircraft carriers and various amphibious vessels, and in the air with more than 100 fighter jets, transport aircraft, maritime surveillance aircraft and helicopters, according to the Norwegian military. With over 4,000 Finnish soldiers taking part, the Norway-led Nordic Response 2024 represents the NATO newcomers' largest ever participation in a foreign exercise. The Swedish Armed Forces said about 4,500 personnel from its Air Force, Army and Navy would take part in the drill, which is being conducted in demanding Arctic winter conditions. Finland, which shares border with Russia, joined NATO in April 2023 in a historic move following decades of military non-alignment. Both Sweden and Finland had developed strong ties with NATO after the end of the Cold War, but public opinion remained firmly against full membership until Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Non-alignment was seen as the best way to avoid tensions with Russia, their powerful neighbor in the Baltic Sea region. But the Russian aggression caused a dramatic shift in public opinion in both countries, and they applied jointly for NATO membership in May 2022. For 2 weeks, world geopolitics has been stormed by the statements of French President Emmanuel Macron. This week he said that there are no more red lines in the war against Russia and that France will send its contingents to Ukraine if necessary. Such statements are understandable for several reasons. Defeat or an extremely unfavorable peace for Ukraine can have a whole series of negative consequences. Up to 10 million more refugees from Ukraine. Success in Ukraine will additionally provoke Russian aggression against Moldova, Poland or the Baltic states. This means millions more refugees and economic collapse for the EU. Russia can increase its share in the world grain market to 30%, which will have devastating consequences for global and European security. Secondly, in France and in other countries, there are more and more conversations about the Sudetenland in 1938 and all the consequences of that process, which ended with the occupation of France for 4 years. On the other hand, there is a relatively positive experience. In 1918, France actively helped Poland, which led to the defeat of Russia. Of course, we also see competition with Germany for leadership in the EU. Although Germany is far ahead of France in terms of weight, Macron takes advantage of Scholz's indecision on the issue of missiles and seizes the initiative. The military was also mentioned, along with the promise to provide Ukraine with more missiles and bombs for the task of deep strikes. The fourth, pushing back the red lines drawn in the minds of Europeans. Russia blackmailed everyone with a nuclear apocalypse and punishments for supplying Ukraine with heavy weapons, but nothing of the sort happened. Now the hypothetical possibility of the participation of contingents of European countries in the war, at least as security forces, is testing yet another Russian red, or more correctly brown, line. For Ukraine, in this situation, in fact, any format of participation, more weapons, reinforcement, border protection and release of forces will be auxiliary and higher than initial expectations. This is okay for us, and in the context of unlikely hypothetical negotiations, it is an additional tool of pressure on the Russian Federation. Time for more on UATV English. You ask hard questions, we answer in easy terms. The question of the week has been voiced by our dear viewer Fahrenheit 1100, and that question sounded like: will Russia come to a peace conference under the current Russian regime? Let's turn off all romanticism and admit that Russia will not come to the peace conference under the current regime. I don't think that the next one will come either, unless it signs the terms of surrender, which will be written for it. Why won't Putin's regime come to peace talks? Because Russia is a country of czars and prison systems, where the power is held by the strong. And the strong do not negotiate, they take everything they can. Yes, our neighbors have such a medieval regime and way of thinking. And this is not only about the government, but also about ordinary people. They are used to obeying. That is why there are no protests caused by the death, although it is more like the murder, of the main opposition. By the way, this is the second time in 10 years because Nemtsov was also killed. Then there were at least some protests on Bolotnaya Square, but the swamp of the Kremlin dragged its people into a sticky swamp. And that is why Putin will not come to any peace conference. Because the peace conference cannot confirm the loss of territorial integrity of Ukraine. And when our soldiers go to the borders of 1991, it will mean death for the modern Russian regime. The next Russian regime after Putin will not come to the peace talks, because it will be either continuation of Putin's policy in the person of any of his modern henchmen, or even if we imagine that someone from the opposition will come to power, then they will not give up Ukrainian land either. Even Alexei Navalny was against the return of Crimea to Ukraine. What to say about others? And as I have already said, even such a proposal will not be accepted by Russian society, and any politician who proposes it will lose power. And so it will be until the Russians change. And for this, not just years, but decades are needed. The only option when the Russian regime will be at the peace conference is when Russia as it is now will no longer exist. There will be either a union of many national countries or differing countries in general. And that is why the Russian regime will not be present at the peace conference. I almost forgot, there is another option when Russia will be at the conference. To simulate peace negotiations. The Kremlin needs time to restock and launch a new attack. And just such a peaceful conference for freezing no peace is waiting in Russia. That seems to be it for tonight and for the week. It was Diana Kolesnik in UATV English breaking the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine as usual. Stay safe and tuned for more.